Behind it, there'll be clear spells and a fair few showers. And then Wednesday, we're left with a bit of a mixed picture. We've got this line of thicker cloud where there'll be some heavy showers on, particularly later in the day over northeast England. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers, but some sunny spells. A brighter day for western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland on Wednesday for sure. Temperatures ticking up to, well, again, the high teens in many places, but again, it'll be these eastern areas that see the top temperatures, and East Anglia could get up to 23 or 24 Celsius.
Tonight on GB News, at 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. Now, more industries are on strike or planning to be. You've got people struggling to get on the housing ladder, rising food banks, whopping inflation, and yet company profits seemingly rising. Is capitalism in crisis? What do you think to that one? And the British Council, an organisation that was being set up to promote Britain, has upset many by including the UK on a list of countries blighted by, I quote, extreme and violent racial tension, civil disobedience and genocide. Other countries on that list include Afghanistan, Libya, Syria and Russia. Why are so many so intent on trying to pull down Britain? And fraud, have you been a victim of it? If so, you are not alone. 40 million of us have fallen victim this year alone, with a total of £3 billion lost, giving us the unenviable title of fraud capital of the world. Is fraud taken seriously enough? And what more can be done about it? We'll have all that to come. But first, the latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. The top story today, the Prime Minister has condemned a Russian attack on a shopping centre in Ukraine, saying it shows the depths Vladimir Putin will sink to. Missiles struck the building in the city of Kremenchuk, setting it alight. At least 10 people were killed and dozens more were injured. The country's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, fears the number of casualties could still climb, saying more than 1,000 people were inside the centre when it was hit. Meanwhile, in Germany, G7 leaders are promising to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. It follows President Zelensky's plea for help with grain exports, reconstruction and military aid. He told them he also wants to end the war before winter sets in. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says the G7 must continue to help defend Ukraine.
There is no deal that the President Zelensky can really do. So in those circumstances, the G7 supporters of Ukraine around the world have to continue to help the Ukrainians to rebuild their economy, to get their grain out, to export their grain. And of course, we have to help them to protect themselves.
Well, NATO is increasing its quick reaction force from 40,000 to more than 300,000. The Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, confirmed the move ahead of a summit in Madrid this week. He also expects allies will agree that Russia poses a direct threat to security and the rules-based international order.
We will agree a strengthened comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine. This will include substantial deliveries of support in areas like secure communications, anti-drone systems and fuel. Over the longer term, we will help Ukraine transition from Soviet-era military equipment to modern NATO equipment and further strengthen its defence and security institutions.
Here, a woman has been killed and a man is fighting for his life after a gas explosion destroyed a house in Birmingham. 6 other homes were damaged in the blast last night, but no one else was seriously injured. Neighbours say one man climbed over flaming debris and threw rubble to reach one of the victims who'd been trapped inside a refrigerator.
We was at home, like everybody else. We just heard a massive bang. Everybody thought it was directly in their house. Obviously, as word got round, we knew what had actually gone on. My partner Callum came down because his friend's mum actually lives on this road, so he just came to see if they was okay. And then obviously once he got here, he just seen all the chaos basically. Callum and I'd say about 10 other men ran obviously in to obviously help and do what they could. They brought a man out on a mattress. I know they was willing to help a lady, but they couldn't actually get to the lady.
Thousands of barristers have been striking across England and Wales over legal aid funding. They refuse to accept new cases or step in for colleagues whose cases are overrunning. Some Crown courts were forced to run limited services with criminal trials and other cases postponed or rescheduled. MPs are due to vote on a new bill that could remove parts of the Brexit deal between the UK and the EU. The government wants to change the Northern Ireland Protocol to make it easier for some goods to flow from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Labour says the bill breaks international law. During the second reading debate on the bill, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said the protocol undermines stability secured by the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, Madam Speaker, the reason I'm putting this bill forward is because I'm a patriot and I'm a Democrat. Our #1 priority is protecting peace and political stability in Northern Ireland and protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Lastly, the Queen has travelled to Scotland for a week for the royal family's annual June break. Her Majesty took part in the ceremony of the Keys at the Palace of Holyrood House, accompanied by the Earl and Countess of Wessex. She was symbolically offered the key to the city of Edinburgh, then promptly returned it, in line with tradition to be looked after by the city's elected officials. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News, you're up to date. And now it's back to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight, my panel, Mark Wallace, is the Chief Exec of Conservative Home, the writer and broadcaster Dominic Samuels, and the comedian Dana Alexander. Got to be honest, last time I had some of this panel, they wouldn't stop talking over each other. So look what I've got, ladies and gentlemen. Look, treated myself, splashed out, got a gavel, also known as a hammer. So tonight I'm having none of it. So I will be getting some order in, although I've got to confess I did get a really cheap one. The cheapest one I could get, quite frankly, so I'm hoping that the end doesn't actually fly off and that I hurt anybody. What can I say? Right, you know the drill on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us here, it's about you at home as well. What is on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at gbnews or at Michelle Dewbs. Don't forget, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to our YouTube page. I've just had a look, actually. Lots of you watching on there, so good evening to you. If you haven't already, you can download our app, or if you're desperate to go out, worry not, you can take me with you on DAB+ radio. So wherever you are joining me tonight, you are very welcome indeed. Now, let's get stuck right into our first story, shall we? I've got a confession. I am indeed a capitalist. I very much believe in a capitalist society, competitive markets, free trade, the government kind of basically sticking their nose as far away out of business as is possible. However, I can't help but wonder as I look around the place, so many people are struggling right now, young people that are working, by the way, can't afford to buy their own houses in London. I mean, fat chance, and that is being replicated right across the country. We've got a summer of so-called discontent, apparently. We're having strikes already, many coming, even barristers striking as well. We've got inflation rising, interest rates rising. Many, though, would say that profit margins are also rising. And it's caused me to ponder, is capitalism in crisis? That is, of course, if you agree that this country is very much a capitalist society. Mark, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, there are evidently very serious threats to capitalism. Because, capitalism and the free market is a system that rests on consent. It involves all of us choosing to live in a particular way that respects each other's rights, that offers opportunity to one another, where we realise that by working together we can end up better off by a system of exchange. But currently, you have a system where we have, there's a major obstacle, particularly to young people, being able to accrue capital in the first place. There's an obstacle of, in some industries, you see profit being privatised and losses being nationalised, where the taxpayer picks up the downside, it's all upside. And the third element is you do see some, frankly, bad businesses behaving in a bad way, where some, I think we should put our hands up to this, some capitalists are sometimes too slow to criticise when bad businesses exploit their position or behave in a negative way. The question is, how do you fix that? And I think particularly the obstacles to accruing capital, locking young people out of the housing market, for example, a lot of that comes from state intervention. The bans in the planning system from building enough homes, or the drive of inflation. You lock everyone away, you prevent them from going to work, and you have to print loads of money in order to help them pay their bills through furlough and so on. Of course inflation rises, but what that means is that people who did the right thing, who saved, are then robbed by inflation of the assets they have accrued. And the question is, how do you fight back in order to reset that balance?
I don't know. That is indeed the question. Are you worried about this, by the way, at home? Get in touch and let me know. Dana, where do you sit?
I think capitalism has been in crisis for quite some time, as we saw in the 2008 crash. Obviously, I think, the government ended up bailing out the banks to the tune of, was it 80 billion, something like that? I'll find the number in a moment. So yes, I do think what we really have to look at when we're talking about this crisis is wealth inequality. And I was looking at a study by the Eurostat, which I found very interesting. They basically studied 10 of Northern Europe, anyways. They measured the 10 richest places and the 10 poorest regions in Northern Europe. And what I found very interesting is that the richest place in Northern Europe is actually central London. And 9 of the 10 poorest places are also strewn throughout England, with West Wales being the poorest in all of Northern Europe.
But what does that tell us, though? Because if you look to other countries that have capitalism as their primary economic system, if that's the right phrase, then what? Are they faring better than us, worse than us? Are we saying
what it's saying is basically that the wealth gap is growing and the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I think you'd find a lot of...
I think it's definitely the case that the rich are getting richer. That doesn't necessarily equate... A larger gap doesn't necessarily mean the poor are getting poorer.
Are they, though?
Well, we've had societies where we've tried to enforce equality as the primary outcome, even if it reduces the lot of the poor. As long as everyone's equal, that's the primary goal. And that increases human misery. I don't think it's the case that the poor are getting...
I would say that wages have pretty much stagnated, and we do see a cost of living crisis, which in, basic terms basically means people have less money to dispose of, right? Or just use on what they want to use it on.
Dominique?
I don't think the issue is necessarily capitalism in itself, because the primary goal of capitalism is competition, and that competition is indiscriminate. It's based upon what you can offer and whether or not you can offer that at a competitive price. That means that businesses tend to make their products better and indeed cheaper, because obviously people want better and cheaper products. That's how capitalism works. I think the issue is that we're seeing an era, and I think it's probably the 2008 crash is a big example of that, I agree, is that we're seeing an era of crony capitalism, not actual capitalism, where certain businesses are given preferential treatment by the state. I mean, we saw that with the COVID contracts that were handed out during the pandemic. Matt Hancock, the former health secretary, was found to have acted unlawfully in that respect by not being transparent enough in terms of the contracts that were awarded. We saw that with the former Prime Minister David Cameron, the scandal that he was in with lobbying on behalf of that collapsed financial firm, Greenhill Capital. We're at a time where we're not rewarding businesses based upon how they perform, but really based upon, you know, whether or not you have a certain level of contacts within government. And I think that would occur irrespective of a Labour or Conservative government. I think there's an issue really deep at the root of our system. And if we actually went back to, you know, competitive free market capitalism and not this weird communist/crony capitalism that we've seen, we really wouldn't be in this position.
We're not in a communist society, though. I don't know.
We're not in a communist society, but it's like this weird... I mean, perhaps that was a bit of a hyperbole, but it's like this weird mix of socialism and capitalism. We've got the government spending all this money, especially during the pandemic, and then snatching it all back by refusing to give people pay rises, obviously because of the inflation that they cause, whilst at the same time allowing pensioners and those receiving state benefits to have their benefits and their pensions rise to match inflation. It's not fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Mark, during the pandemic, the government, for me, was too desperate to try and keep all companies afloat. And I know people will be watching that saying, well, why should people lose their jobs? But it is basic natural forces that not all businesses should stay afloat. Some of them, I would say, we kept companies on essentially some kind of life support machine, that they weren't really viable businesses. We just kept them going a couple more years than they ought to have been. But I worry more, because I do support businesses making profit. But I think what I worry about is going into the irresponsible verge now. So I'll give you an example, banks, and people will spit the tea out laughing at me saying, when have they ever been responsible? But you can see at the moment we're on the fast track to potentially quite high base rates, interest rates. I mention this often, it's my little gripe. The second it goes up, the base rate, you get a text message within a nanosecond from your bank saying, sorry to disappoint you all, but your variable rate will be going up if that's what you've got. You do not get the same text message ever. I don't think I've ever received one from my bank saying, good news, savers, your saving product has gone up. I don't think I've ever had one.
And when you see negative rates, when have you ever seen a bank start paying out to borrowers?
Of course, but they don't. Of course.
Indeed. I mean, for that matter, you know, you can note this in some other institutions. HMRC will charge you interest for a much longer period of time when you owe them money than try and get interest out than when they've overcharged you and you're finding getting out. But there is that, major challenge, as I said before, about exactly how you know, in the pandemic, for example, I can understand why at the start of in our lifetime, unprecedented situation, I can understand why you had blanket measures in terms of, say, furlough, in terms of business loans and so on. Remember, back in March, April 2020, there were people, I was speaking to people that we work with about postponing and moving an event online. I remember 3 or 4 people writing back to me and saying, why don't you just delay it by a month and then we'll all be back? And we now know life was different. Where I do agree is that it's obviously the case that some industries are not coming back in the same way they were. And I think for far too long we allowed what were already, frankly, zombie companies, dead businesses walking to carry on. And it was already clear, really, that the writing's on the wall there'll be other industries that are going to be in huge trouble as the aftermath of the pandemic continues to unravel. I think we'll see this in rail, for example, where the RMT are deluded if they're looking at the rail industry thinking, you know what, it's back to business as usual for commuters. But I think there were some cases, you're right, where the writing was on the wall earlier. It was quite clear, and actually politicians, I don't think, really wanted to take the plunge early and say, terribly sorry, this business doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's also to do with a bit of inconsistency as well, because my gripe is, I can obviously appreciate that many businesses and many people would have lost their jobs during the pandemic if the government hadn't stepped in. But, you know, the government took this socialist approach, really, to the pandemic. But then we're in a cost of living crisis at the moment. All of a sudden, people are saying that we should invoke these sort of penny-pinching, austerity-light attitudes towards public spending. And I think for that, it just appears inconsistent, and it makes the government look as though they're not really invested in everyday working people, and at the same time focusing on the wrong things. For example, this green agenda that the government has, throwing money at all of these companies that profess to want to do all these great things for the environment. And really, it's just spaffing money up the wall, refusing to actually look into the benefits of fracking is an example of another one. It seems ideology seems to trump common sense recently as well.
Do you think that's fair? Ideology trumps common sense, Dana?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we have to look what happens in the end. All of this is guesswork right at the beginning. But what I would like to say is I don't think that capitalism or socialism or communism has ever existed in its purest forms. So I think what we have, because we're talking about a Tory government, and a lot of people immediately associate that with capitalism, and I would have to agree with Dominique on the sense that, yes, they did behave in a bit of a socialist way, but I really think that they had to. And as somebody who works up and down the country, I've seen way too many businesses go under. Debenhams is gone. Like, you go down to some of these smaller towns, and they've just been devastated. And there has to be something done. I mean, if we're going to... I think it's very interesting that the government decided to give retirees the 10% increase, right? And I also think it's also interesting to note that 65% of them vote Tory. That's another that's another thing to talk about. But we have to be real, because once these wages start to go down, we're going to start putting people in some very desperate situations, and it will have an impact on our society at large.
Yeah, James makes a good point. James says, Michelle, we don't have true capitalism in this country. The government is way too involved in everybody's lives. The government should be by our side and not on our backs. Ian says, the primary goal of capitalism is to screw the workers and make shareholders and excesses rich. Get a grip, Michelle. Kevin says, capitalism in crisis seems to suggest that the alternative might be an improvement. What would you rather do? Go and live in somewhere like Venezuela, Russia, Cuba? No, I wouldn't. Go rather live anywhere. I quite like it here. I just think, for me, I just worry if too many companies... And I understand it, Mark, by the way, because a lot of companies have been squeezed and they've struggled over the last couple of years. And I just don't know if a couple of them are getting a little bit too ahead of themselves when it comes to the price rises. Because, sure, you know, supply chain costs are increasing, but not often to the extent that I feel like I see it when I go out and about. Mobile phone contracts. The one that I'm on, I got a text however long ago it was. We're putting it up, RPI, plus this, plus that, plus that. And I sat there and I thought, well, why? What's your justification for that?
Exactly. There's nobody carrying the text messages to and from your door who's getting paid a wage to do that. The infrastructure is pretty automated. And I think there's, as you said earlier, the fact is, when, you know, if fuel prices go up in an inflationary environment or due to a supply chain problem, for example, with the war in Ukraine, when are they going to come down? Do we believe they'll ever come back down to the level they were before in free or second? They never do. There's a ratchet effect. Unfortunately, you see the same, of course, with tax. You know, the fact is that if you look at the proportion of the price at the pump on petrol that goes through VAT, that goes through fuel duty, the Exchequer is laughing on the back of this. You know, when we talk about windfall taxes, where's the windfall tax on the Exchequer? You know, they're making a fortune when your energy bill, household energy bill goes up.
Is that your plan?
We could see some kind of rebate, couldn't we? Wouldn't that be a reasonable basis? The Exchequer's raking in more money. For example, we still charge VAT, albeit the reduced rate, on household energy in this country. Everyone's lamenting that household energy bills are going up. There's green levies, as Dominic says, on those bills as well. You know, perhaps, you know, even while you deal with questions of, say, corporate price gouging, if that's happening in various different industries, the Exchequer is also making its cut. It gets a proportionate, it charges by the percent.
Well, Peter's having none of it. Peter says, Michelle, this cost of living crisis is nowhere near what it was in the 70s. My mortgage was 17.5% and wage rises were 5%. These young people don't know how lucky they are. So says Peter.
I bet Peter has a house.
Do you have a house, Peter? I bet you do as well. And I wonder, Peter, how much equity you have made in that property. Because I will be fair, anyone that's kind of youngish or whatever, quite frankly, it doesn't matter being young or not, if you're trying to get onto the housing ladder right now, it is extortionate. And when you compare that to average wages, it is extreme. So you tell me, Peter, you get back to me, I'm going to take a break. And while I'm in the break, you can reply to me. I've got a quick question for you. Do you have a house? What did you pay for it? And how many times your earnings was what you bought your house? How much equity have you got in it now? No, I'm not the tax man, I'm just curious. Right, it's going to take a quick break. When we come back, if you've heard about a country that's been plagued by extreme and violent racial tension, civil disobedience and genocide, well, you probably won't want to live there, quite frankly, would you? But it's bad news for you if you live in the UK, because the chances are you already do. Is the UK really that bad? We'll be discussing in just a couple of minutes. I'll see you then.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show, Islamist terror attack on an Oslo gay bar. Mark Steyn contributor Eva Vladingbrook is here to discuss the difficult questions that politicians want to avoid. Experienced pathologist Dr. Claire Craig examines the FDA's decision to approve COVID vaccinations for under 5s in the United States. Could this be a jab too far? Plus, Free Speech Union founder Toby Young has been busy celebrating 150 years of Speaker's Corner today. Join us tonight as he gets off his soapbox to talk about exactly why that matters. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show tonight from 8 o'clock.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight, my panel, Mark Wallace, the Chief Exec of Conservative Home, the writer and broadcaster Dominique Samuels, and the comedian Dana Alexander. Lots of you guys getting in touch. But not you, Peter. I've been waiting. I've been poised waiting for your response if you missed the programme just before the break. Peter was basically saying that the young basically don't know they're born compared to how hard it used to be in the olden days. So I've asked Peter for a couple of examples. I wait with bated breath. I'm genuinely fascinated as to what's what, Darren says. Michelle, what a pathetic answer from you. Do you really think it was easy to get on the housing ladder back when interest rates were 15%? Grow up. Of course, people of an older generation will have equity, as everyone buying a house now will have in 30 years too, Darren. Well, my question back to that, Darren, would be that actually, if you compare it, because I too bought a house when I was very young and I had to scrimp and save and all the rest of it, but comparatively, the difference, the disproportionality between what you earn and the prices. I mean, look in London. I don't know where anyone lives, but if I'll pick London because I'm sitting here. London, for example, you're buying shoe boxes. I'm talking actual shoe boxes now. Many people live in a single room with their bed and this and that and all the other. And they're hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds. I just think the world's gone mad. Anyway, you tell me what you think. As I said, Darren thinks I'm absolutely deluded. I'm waiting to hear what Peter has to say about his property. And keep getting in touch. A lot of people, by the way, are quite offended at what I'm saying, the suggestion that now it's all about the young people struggling and somehow a reflection that they didn't have to struggle.
Yeah, that's not what you're saying.
Well, I know, but people have a lot of equity in their properties, don't they? And I think there is when we talk, I'm going massively off topic, by the way, sorry, I will move on in a sec. When we talk about, in fact, no, do you know what? I'll talk about it. I'll come back.
I know a guy who bought his parents bought their house for something like $3,000 or $5,000 up north in the middle of nowhere, and it's worth $80,000 now. It's humongous.
It's just not
80 is a cheap house now. Do you know what I mean? 80,000.
What, you can buy a house now for 80?
Well, he's in the middle of nowhere. What's it? Steve Allen's parents. We were talking about it on Headliners another week. But yeah, they got huge amounts of equity.
80 is very cheap. I'm even thinking in Hull.
But
anyway,
we bought it for nothing.
I digress. This is not Holmes Under the Hammer. In case you've just tuned in, you've not watched the wrong programme, don't worry. And I think that whole housing topic, it deserves more focus, doesn't it? I'm going to be doing some special programmes over the summer. And one of them is going to be about the housing crisis. What do we do? Have we got a crisis? How do we fix it? What is the answer? Anyway, for now, though, the British Council has come in for criticism after an internal report ranked the UK alongside countries with poor human rights records, such as Afghanistan and Libya. The Council is meant to promote Britain overseas, but the Mail obtained an internal report which included Britain in a list of countries where there are, I quote, ethnic conflicts, civil disturbances and genocides. The report also said that in the UK, racism permeates institutions, laws, policies, procedures and practice. Sounds awful. Why on earth would you want to live there? Anyway, Dominic, what do you make to all this?
I just think it's, quite frankly, insulting to suggest that the UK is a country marred by racial tension and violence and civil disobedience or whatever, because in comparison to countries across the world and countries in Europe, the UK is one of the most racially tolerant countries. Now, that doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist here, and I think whenever people say that, they're like, oh, you're saying racism doesn't exist. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying comparative to many countries all over the world, Britain is a warm, welcoming place to be, and that's why so many people choose to live here and come here from overseas. If we were such a horrible place, why do so many people actually want to come here? And I think really this is about a sort of left-wing self-flagellation that seeks to paint this country as some evil beacon of hatred and racism, when, quite frankly, that isn't the case. And it's insulting, actually, to countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, China, that have very overt forms of racism. Look at the modern slave trade that still exists in the Middle East that involves mostly West Africans. That's the things that we should be focusing on, and those are the things that matter, but conveniently the report doesn't do that.
Yeah, China, by the way, you talk about conveniently, that was missing. But I mentioned, I wasn't being glib, by the way, when I said it sounds awful, why would anyone want to live there? Because that is actually one of the purposes of the British Council. It's supposed to promote us. Anyone reading those kind of documents would be forgiven for thinking, what a cesspit. But I really don't believe that it is. Dana, am I wrong?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's a cesspit, but I would say as a Canadian that I was surprised to see so many right-wing groups when I came here. BNP, we've talked about this, EDL, UKIP, Reclaim. We know the history with the National Front. And I think when
you can't compare Reclaim to the National Front.
And I'm ridiculous. See, this is where we get into the point where everyone's interrupting and then I'm the bad left.
But I didn't interrupt you before.
Can I finish my point? Can I finish my point?
Yes, you can. Go on.
Okay, so basically, are you saying that Quango is some evil left organization? I mean, if we're going to promote Britain overseas, especially when we're promoting it to countries that may have been former colonies, it might be in our interest to do a little bit of acknowledgement, or people are just going to look at you like you're crazy. We have to make a decision. Are we going to tackle racism, or are we here to keep up appearances?
But to suggest that our society is marred by racial tension.
When I got here in 2011, they burnt down my neighborhood in a race riot after Mark Duggan was shot by the police. I would say that that's extreme racial violence and tension across the country.
Well, hang on just a nanosecond, because etched on my brain are these Mark Duggan riots that you're referring to.
I remember that.
I particularly remember, for example, Clapham. I don't know where you live.
Tottenham was where I was.
Yeah, I remember Clapham. I'll never forget those riots. But I would actually dispute, Dana, and I'm going a little bit off topic, but, you know, whatever. It's my own show. If I can't do that on my own show, what can I do, Mark?
That makes it the topic. It's not off topic.
It's kind of linked. Anyway, the Mark Duggan, you say about these racial tensions, inequalities, all the rest. Those people that were out were rioting those nights about Mark Duggan. Most of those people were not rioting about Mark Duggan. Most of those people recognised an opportunity to go and ransack Foot Locker and get their latest Nike Air Max Jordans or whatever it was. I'm not trendy enough to know. That's what they were doing because
so
they
weren't
get away.
upset. They weren't upset.
Even in the party squad.
Even in Manchester.
They weren't upset that an unarmed man was shot.
They were upset
they
about.
Didn't
sorry,
go to the
I thought
police
we were not shouting over each other. But they were annoyed about Mark Duggan being shot.
Annoyed.
They were.
Understatement.
There was a riot. I would argue a series of riots against law and order. You think that was a race riot? It was about after a gangster was shot by the police. There was a riot against law and order. And well,
they tried to frame him as well.
I think we can refer back to the findings of the court case. But well, there's no.
He was. Even his son is a.
I think if we're going, I think it's at minimum debatable to say the 2011 riots were race riots. Certainly in various parts of London, what you saw, including in Streatham Hill in South London, where I lived at the time, what you saw was mobs of people of a range of different races, including white people, often attacking, for example, people who run in shops and small businesses.
Colston.
Also,
how about the Colston statue coming down?
Just a moment. I did actually wait when you were making your point. There were people who were running shops and trying to protect their properties and small businesses. Mm-hmm. Also, many of them ethnic minority, trying to defend their property against riots against the principle of law and order. Yeah, that's very different to a race riot. Colston, I think. What you see there, unfortunately, was, is there a debate about the memorialisation of racists in history? Undoubtedly there is. Frankly, we are a country where, by and large, the vast majority of debate about that happens in a peaceable way. It doesn't happen in a country that feels to me marred by violence. I think it's quite concerning, for example, when the way genocide is bundled in by the British Council in reference to this list. That's quite concerning to me too, because, for example, my wife and children are descendants of a child survivor of the Armenian genocide. And I think these things are incredibly important to understand why they have happened, why they're happening right now with China trying to exterminate the Uyghur people and to carry out cultural as well as physical genocide. Well, it's cultural and physical and racial genocide that's being carried out there, including religious, because you have a Maoist state that views the idea of having a Muslim minority within its borders as a threat to their ideology. The Russian genocide that's being attempted against Ukraine currently, or the history of, say, the Holodomor, the Soviet Union's genocide against Ukrainians. These are incredibly important things to understand. It's right that we talk about them, including Britain's role in genocides and various atrocities in the past as well. But Have you ever experienced racism? Sorry? Have you ever experienced racism? Have I? No, I don't believe I have. It's kind of interesting that you're trying to tell this to a black person in this country. It's not a question of telling... And that we're centering your feelings in a discussion about race. It's not a question of my feelings. What I did just mention was there was a genocide which tried to exterminate my wife and her children from ever existing. When a 12-year-old girl 105 years ago was the only survivor of her village in West Armenia... We're talking about Britain. Sorry? We're talking about Britain. This doesn't count. I'm not saying that it doesn't count. We're specifically talking about racial tensions within Britain. So you're drawing a comparison to Armenia as a white person who's never experienced racism. We're talking about the British Council. And trying to explain racial tension that you've never experienced in this country to a black person that lives in this country. But I think, for example, we're allowed to have an exchange in which I absolutely recognise that there are racial tensions in this country. I questioned whether the 2011 riots were race riots or whether they were riots against the principle of law and order. I think it's allowed to disagree with that in a respectful way.
Sure, I think you might have a little bit more of a leg to stand on if you were someone who actually has ever experienced racism.
Yeah, but
what I'm not seeking right now is a leg for me personally to stand on. What I'm interested in is an informed discussion.
And don't you think
that is a bit of a race? That's
don't
a bit
you
of a
think it would be a little bit
supposition as
strange
well?
for you to ask me how homophobia is in England as someone who is not part of the LGBTQ?
I think it would be completely acceptable for you to have a view on it, as informed as you might try to be, while not claiming to be the Bible.
It doesn't
on the
negate
topic.
lived experience.
I don't think. Sorry, can I just one moment? Did I ever say that it did negate lived experience? Because I think it's somewhat controversial to suggest that I just said it negates. I've never said that. I've never said that. I think it's very unfair to suggest that I have.
Dana, I don't really share this narrative that
of course
what you're
you don't.
trying
That's
to
why
do.
you hired me on the show.
No, but hold on. You don't even know what I'm going to say. I don't share this narrative that because he's white, he can't have an opinion on racism, because by your very definition, if what you're suggesting is there's all these racial tensions, well, it must be perpetrated by someone, and I'm assuming that the people that you think are perpetrating this are the white people. So therefore, surely you can have a view even from that perspective. I find this whole situation about you can't talk about racism because you're not black and therefore you've got no lived experience.
Once again, you've truncated what I've said and you've misinterpreted what I said. He does have an opinion on racism. We're on a show talking about racism. What I'm trying to say is if we're going to have discussions about this, and if the government's going to hire people to investigate these things, we can't start overshadowing voices that actually have lived experiences.
But we did that. I'm sorry, but we did that though. For example, the race report that came out last year,
which is widely disputed.
Because yes, but that was
Dana,
written.
let her speak.
But that was written by people that have a lived experience. They are black people. And Asian people.
How many people don't even want to be
you need to let Dominique speak.
They just so happen to be black people that don't even want to be included.
I'm about to hammer my thing, and I don't want to hammer my thing because we're not all 12.
Yeah,
we've all just listened to you. Now, Dominique, I would like to listen to you as well.
Okay, the thing is, a different view on racism and race relations in the UK, which was seen via the race report that was released just last year, because that doesn't follow the left-wing narrative of racism is rife in Britain and it's everywhere you go, and every single disparity that exists between ethnic minorities needs to be viewed through a lens of white versus black, when actually the reality is it's not like that. It's actually way more nuanced. Unless you have that viewpoint, you're immediately shut down. There are black people like myself who actually have experienced racism from a range of different people, not just white people.
Who said it was just white people? That was what you imposed into this conversation.
No, I didn't.
You rewind.
No, I'm not saying you've said that verbally, but it's the way you sort of frame the debate. All of a sudden, Mark can't have an opinion on racism because you're a black woman and you have this lived experience. You can't monopolise debates based upon your personal characteristics.
I'd just like to reiterate, you did inaccurately, untruthfully say that I had said at any point that somebody else having an opinion, including me, negates lived experience, which I do think it'd be reasonable for you to acknowledge I didn't say.
Well, what I didn't say is that you can't have an opinion on racism. What I will say is that it's a bit absurd that you're lecturing a black person
I'm not lecturing you whatsoever.
About racism.
I'm black, and I don't agree with you.
You know what side your bread's buttered on, girl. Of course you're not going to say
exactly, and that is the root of it. The idea that someone can't disagree with you and just literally have a different opinion.
No, because the problem
it has to be because my bread is buttered on a different side. When in reality, then you're from Canada. You're not even British.
Yeah,
So really,
my mom's British.
My lived experience of this country is probably better than yours. You're not even British.
So what?
So you can't have an opinion on race relations in Britain.
This is the point.
That's how it goes. That's how it goes.
Living in
I'm using your own logic, darling.
Give me a break.
That's your logic.
I live in Britain.
All of a sudden it's stupid. You're not British, though.
Right. So?
Have you lived here your whole life?
I've lived here 12 years. My mother's British.
You've not lived here your whole life.
And your queen is on our money.
You've not lived here the whole life.
And you know what?
I can have more of an opinion than you.
Mother.
Using that logic.
Pack it in, the pair of you.
You guys hired us. You know we don't get along. I don't
No, but you don't need to get along.
I don't not get along with you.
I don't get along with you.
I don't even know you.
Why can't we have respectful disagreement.
Because what
Why
you've
can't we
done is because
respectfully
you guys like to
debate?
triple up on the lefty. You know you brought me on here for a little bit of controversy. You know it didn't go off so well last time.
Grow up.
Grow up.
As
girl.
you said,
What
you're
are
old enough to
20?
be my mother.
Exactly.
I'm on debate
So what,
shows
you
all
think-
the time where I'm debating one person and two presenters.
And look at you, you're the only
and I'm
one
not here
getting
crying.
red in the face, girl.
So just relax.
You're the only who's not. I'm
You
not
need to
relaxed.
because
That's
you're
you,
acting like a
girl.
child.
See, I've got to be honest.
I'll say what I want to say,
You're
and I'll
acting
tell
like
you
a
this: I'm a
child.
lot
And
more
why are you
chilled
even
out
on
than you are.
GB News?
honey.
if you don't like it?
Please.
I don't think this
Did I ask to be here?
Then go
Did I
then.
ask to be
Bye.
here? Now you're in hiring, hey? Now you're hiring, girl.
Excuse me, it is actually my programme. When you say that you did, if you don't want to be here...
You hired me, but the problem is you guys, we don't even have a balanced discussion, first of all. You put me on here with three people who are politically opposed to me, and then I'm supposed to hear, yes, Britain's a great place. There are racial problems, which you've acknowledged, and I'm sorry, this whole woke left, they're after us. Listen, there are issues, and I'm sorry, if Britain wants to improve on these issues, if you look at countries like South Africa, they did something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If you look at Germany...
Because South Africa's going so well right now.
Oh, well, that's not what the point is, that you don't even know the half of it, girl, because you probably weren't even born. Let's talk about denazification. We have to unlearn this. Listen, we can go to Glasgow, we can go to Liverpool, we can go to all the shores where people, come on, we put up statues of guys that drowned 20,000 slaves in the sea. We still have streets named after them. And you're going to sit here and pretend that there's no racial tension? It's tense right now.
No one
now.
said that there's no racial tension. Of course, you'd be a stupid person if you think that there's no racial tension in this country.
I think you're more upset that you're on a list with Afghanistan.
Excuse me. The thing that people are getting upset about or frustrated about, or whatever you want to call it, is this notion that we are this almost kind of cesspit of awfulness.
What I say.
I'm
I can say
talking
it.
about the fact, excuse me, I'm talking about the fact that the UK is on a report alongside those countries that we've just listed, and that was the debate that we're supposed to be having. I don't appreciate the kind of the nastiness sometimes that we get. Respectful debate is what I welcome and appreciate on Dewbs & Co. Going to take a break, but before we do so, British Council spokesman said the following: the document that we've just been discussing is a resource for staff that sets out our approach to race equality, explaining that no country in the world is immune to instances of racism, including the UK. There you go. I'm going to have a quick break and a cup of tea, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight, it's my panel, Mark Wallace, the Chief Exec of Conservative Home, the writer and broadcaster Dominique Samuels, and the comedian Dana Alexander. I tell you what, I wanted a tequila in that break, but nah, none was forthcoming. Right, Nigel Farage will be with us at 7. Nigel, good evening to you. What have you got for us?
Good evening. Well, a former Qatari Prime Minister walks into Clarence House with a suitcase with €1 million in it in 500 notes, and the Prince of Wales accepts it for his charity. Given that extraordinary lapse of judgment, I'll be joined by the BBC's former royal correspondent, Michael Cole, to ask the question, is Charles fit to be king? We'll also look at Norway, the horrific murders and attacks at the Gay Pride event in Oslo, and yet the British newspapers today are not even mentioning it. We're going to.
Well, we'll see you at 7, Nigel. Very smart tie, by the way. Very dapper. We'll see you at 7. Right, here. We've been discussing the situation around the UK a lot, haven't we, tonight? But I'll tell you where we are. World leading, and it's a place that probably none of us would want us to be, fraud. A Daily Mail investigation says that we are the global capital of fraud, with almost £3 billion lost every single year to scam artists. 40 million Brits are apparently targeted annually. Are you one of them? I've got to say, these scammers, they are incredibly sophisticated, aren't they? It really is tricky sometimes to decipher what is a genuine request for your details and what is fraudulent. Dana, do you think we do enough? Do we take fraud seriously in this country?
Well, I think a lot of people are really uninformed about what's actually happening. You can actually find out a little bit more about a lot of these. There's guys who work on YouTube called Scammer Payback. I can't remember his name. I think it's Pierogi or something like that, who actually go after these call centers in places like New Delhi and things like that. And you have to know that these people are probably targeting Britain because of the strength of its currency. But also we have an aging population, and they tend to kind of find out what your age is. So a lot of the time, if you get like a data collection for examples, what is your name? Is this your house? We're the council. We're going to come by with some repairs or whatever like that. People fish for data, and then they'll use that against you, and they'll target you saying you haven't paid enough tax. They'll target you saying we have a refund that we're going to give you for an Amazon product that you didn't buy. All sorts of things to get your details. And don't ever, anytime that somebody calls you that you don't know, what you need to do is you need to get on the internet and you need to find out where that number is from by doing a reverse lookup.
Dominique?
Yeah, I've actually had experience with fraud. It's probably my fault for being stupid, but they're really prevalent on Snapchat. So there are these celebrities, these influencers that promote these Snapchat accounts or these Instagram accounts that promise that if you invest this amount of money, you'll get this amount of money back in return. So when I was in, I think it was my first year of university, I did that with an amount of money, and surprise, surprise, I didn't get the money back. I felt ridiculous and stupid.
You lost it all?
Yeah, but luckily, actually, I didn't think I would, but my bank actually refunded me the money. I explained what had happened, that I'd obviously been defrauded, and my bank is a good one because I actually received the money back. So it is a problem. It's happened to me loads of times. I don't know where my number is, but I get texts a lot of the time, and recently I even got a weird call from someone even trying to get my details. Luckily, I realised who it was and put the phone down. But this is actually a really big problem, and doing reading on this, I didn't realise the scale of it, to be honest.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really peculiar, Mark, I'm sure we've all had this, is when you get a phone call from, I don't know, let's just pick a random company, American Express, and I'm not picking on American Express, I'm just using it as an example. They'll say, oh, hello, is that Michelle Dewberry? Yes. Right, before I proceed, can I take some of your details? Sorry? Well, you know, your date of birth, your this, your that. No, I have no idea who you are. You just called me out of the blue. What is it? Yes, but until you identify yourself, we can't proceed with a call. Well, I don't want the call. You called me. And I found that such a strange notion.
It's framed as a security check, even when it's the legitimate company. And actually, it is, unfortunately, these people are fraudsters are very, very clever in terms of spotting these kind of human behaviours that you can play on, it's a psychological game, in order to scam people. I've got to say credit to Dominic for talking about your own experience on this.
Yeah.
One of the things that a huge amount of this figure is hidden below the waterline because people understandably do feel really embarrassed about it. Even to there's a neighbour of ours who lives with her elderly mother who isn't very well. who had somebody ring up and say that they were they were the phone company, and there was this kind of issue with her phone line, and then they came to her door, and then they took her in a car to a cash point, take money out. And she was too ashamed. Obviously, she realised what had happened. She was too ashamed and also frightened, because they knew where she lived, to talk about this. I've got to say, unfortunately, we're going to see, I expect, an even more rapid rise in online frauds and computer hijacking, not least, of course, because some of this is also state-sponsored. And actually, Russia has increasingly made this a state-sponsored industry, where effectively the Kremlin now has because it has a cash flow problem for external currencies, has basically made a deal with organised crime that it will turn a blind eye in return for a cut of the profits. And so I think we're going to see more of this used as an economic weapon, as well as something that just simply takes place in organised crime.
Well, David's been in touch saying, Michelle, I can't believe anyone falls for the tricksters. I would always tell them to write to me, then I would check personally. I think you'd be surprised, actually, David, because some of these scams, they are incredibly sophisticated. And it's not everything, I guess, that you can ask them to write to you, but it's certainly one tactic to get people to do that, see whether or not it works. Have you been a victim of fraud, by the way? If you have, tell me. Peter, if you was watching at the start of the programme, you remember Peter got in touch. He said, Michelle, my first terrace house was £6,000. It was 2.5 times my salary. That was all we could borrow, he says, from the Building Society. We've since moved 6 times. The house now we're retired to is a bungalow, and it's worth approximately £250,000. Not doing too bad, are you, Peter? All I'd say back to that is, I'll pick on London again just because we're sitting here. £250,000 in London, I dread to think what it'd buy you. Somewhere incredibly small, tiny, maybe even a studio flat, a room with a bed, etc. Right. I was just about to read some more fraud stories, but you know what? We can read fraud, and we all get the picture, don't we? Be careful out there is the point. Lots of response to that racism conversation.
I can imagine.
The sentiment that I'm getting, thick and fast, is that people don't have the sense that that Britain is absolutely steeped in racism to its core, all of these institutions and all the rest of it. But each to their own, certainly differing opinions on this panel. Let me ask, shall I say, end by asking you a simple question. If you could, would you want to live until you're 200? No. Is my answer to that. The reason I'm asking, by the way, because all of this kind of anti-aging technology and all the rest of it, these scientists now reckon that progress is being made so quickly that you watching us, you could live until you're about 150, 200. No, thanks.
I definitely
would you want to live till 200?
No.
No? Would you?
Definitely. I would love to see what the future holds.
No, you wouldn't.
I'm terrified.
I'll be a wrinkly old walnut in the corner watching it, but I'd still love to see what the future... It's exciting. You know, imagine how much the world's changed in the last 150 years. Imagine what's going to come. I'd love to see that. It'd be like a time machine just taking a long time.
Dana, would you want to live till you're 200, 150?
I think that would depend on what condition I'm in.
Yeah, but I think that based upon how things are going, like, there'll be no such thing as men or women, no such thing as borders.
God, I don't think...
No such thing as age.
I'm an optimist. I think that the human condition, despite many downsides and flaws, has continued overall to improve, while massively increasing the number of people at the same time. So I think the future's going to be really exciting. I envy my kids the prospect of what they're going to see when they're 100.
Global warming.
Oh, yes.
As long as we don't have to sit on this panel until we're 200, to be honest with you. That's my main goal.
I'm going to come to one of your gigs. You're a comedian. I'm intrigued. I shall get myself along and see how it is. Anyway, no, I most certainly would not want to live until I was 200 years old. If my mum's watching, she'll know she's got a saying. She always says, you've got to die to make way for the babies. Very true, Mum. If everyone lived until they were 200, where would we make the room for the new babies that are coming along? That's what I'm pondering. Yeah. Lots of you, as I said, the topic that's got you all talking tonight is the racist one. Ryan says, it's absolute nonsense. I've never understood this self-loathing of one's own country. Britain is beautiful. His words, not mine. Have yourself a fantastic night, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Good evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Bit of a switch around with the weather tomorrow. It's looking drier and brighter in the east, with more persistent rain further west. Today, we've had a largely fine end to the day in the west. A lot of heavy showers still at the moment from this weather front further east, but this one is moving in from the Atlantic. The isobars are squeezing together, suggesting it's not just going to be wet, but increasingly windy for Northern Ireland overnight, and that rain spreading into western parts of Scotland. Otherwise, though, this evening showers fading from the east and many places becoming dry with clear spells over northeast Scotland, England and Wales. That will allow temperatures, certainly in rural spots, to dip well down into single figures. So a fresh start here, but plenty of sunshine actually to start the day over the Midlands and eastern parts of England. There will be a dull and wet start though for Northern Ireland, and increasingly that rain could cause some problems through the day over southwest Scotland. So we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. May turn a little drier by the afternoon for Northern Ireland, but still some heavy showers here, and the rain will steadily spread into western parts of Wales and southwest England. But many central and eastern areas dry and fine. Pleasant day over eastern England, quite warm temperatures. 22, 23 degrees, much cooler with the wet and windy weather further west. That rain band will spread eastwards, kind of breaking up as it does so. So the rain a little more sporadic, but certainly turning a bit soggy over the Midlands, much of northern England as we head into Wednesday. And then we're left with a line of thicker cloud down across England, bringing some outbreaks of rain on Wednesday. That rain could turn quite heavy, particularly by the afternoon, breaking out into thunderstorms potentially over northeast England. The risk of heavy showers in the southwest as well. Again, possibility of thundery showers. Either side, though, some drier and brighter weather. Certainly a brighter day in western Scotland on Wednesday compared to Tuesday. And temperatures mid to high teens, but again quite warm in the southeast. Low pressure bringing more showers on Thursday.